Welcome everyone to Male Fuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about The Boys, Season 4, Episode 5. It's called Beware the Jabberwock, My Son. What is that title? Anyway, I laughed really hard at the end of this episode because Old MacDonald started playing over the credits, and I was actively thinking during a very specific scene in the middle of this episode that maybe the title I put on the YouTube video would be a reference to that song. I'll think it will. I actually had a few good options. I also kind of wanted to pick I Don't Want to Be Jar Jar. Ultimately, I think it's funnier to do something relating to the animals, but that line did stick out. Yeah, so some over the top boy stuff as per usual with this one. I feel like by the end of this episode, it did basically confirm for me that Kessler is in Butcher's head. The reaction of Samir, the scientist slash Zoe's father, Newman's lover. I think they're married, so I can't say husband, but his reaction when Butcher said "we" at the end was kind of all I needed to see, really. That was kind of it. So the whole idea of him being the devil on his shoulder, while Speck is the angel on his shoulder, is kind of solidified at this point. But yeah, farmyard animals deals with oh god, what's Gus Fring's name in this? Well, we haven't seen him in a while, right? You haven't seen him since last season, so I completely have blanked on his name. But regardless, he is back, and he is enlisted by Butcher and co. to help get this virus. So we're finally kind of tying into a lot of the Gen V stuff here. In fact, we even see a couple of Gen V characters at the other thing that's going on in this episode, which is the Hall H style presentation for the VOT cinematic universe. I have I have many things to say about that, actually. They're all just kind of cheap shots at the MCU and other superhero things, but they all cracked me up. It was a good excuse to have a variety of little jokes. Obviously, the slate of phases 7 through 13 really got a reaction out of me. So yeah, we see Kate and Sam from Gen V presenting their new show, as well as some other little things here or there. But now the line that Billy said early on that really got me is when they're sort of forming a plan, and he's admitting that he doesn't know how he killed the stretchy dude. Ezekiel is his name. I learned that this episode. He just at the end of the scene turns around and says, "Oh, by the way, I need one more little thing, a wee presidential pardon." That line made me laugh because it was just I just did not expect him to say that, but it is for Giancarlo Esposito's character, who of course raised a Newman, and they want his help because he is actually quite shocked to find out that his granddaughter effectively has been dosed up with Compound V. And he basically makes the deal that he'll help stop Newman and get custody of his granddaughter. That's what he wants to do. But all of this is just to set up the fact that they go out to this farmhouse where Newman has got her lover slash scientist, Zoe's dad, right? Samir. I'm just going to call him Samir from now on because that's his name. But he's out there working on the virus that she got from Godolkin. And the previously on did show a little bit of Gen V to set this up. I think this is just the right amount of crossover, actually, where if you've watched both shows, it's nice to like have this feel all connected, but I don't think if you weren't watching Gen V, this would be that difficult to follow. All you need to know is virus was being developed at a university and humans got it, and that's not really that hard to just kind of get your head around as you're watching. You don't feel like you've missed too much if you didn't. But yeah, like Newman shows up quite quickly. Most of them get nosebleeds, and there's a sweet little moment where Butcher lets a rabbit out of a cage, which Kimiko quite likes. There's actually a few interactions in this episode between characters who I don't typically think of having moments together. Kimiko and Butcher's one here where she's happy that he's freed the animal from the cage, something that obviously harkens back to the fact that she was a caged animal, if you will. Not a literal animal, but you know what I mean. And then later on, like Starlight trying to talk to Frenchie and like saying, "Hey, open up, talk to Kimiko," but like they kind of bond a little. But there's a little bit opening up in various pairs that don't necessarily always interact with each other. And I think part of that is just because so many of the characters are together. But whatever's happened at this lab, because there's blood everywhere, one of the lab assistants is dead. It wasn't Butcher and the boys that did this. Newman didn't do this, so there's something going on here, and we have to find where the virus is. So a lot of this plot in this episode is everyone kind of having a truce and looking around this farmland for whoever killed the lab technicians and whatever's going on. And quite quickly, we find out that we have bulletproof chickens, which are very severe and fly through one person. Later on, we have flying sheep that are ripping people apart. All of this was quite funny. You know, they do a whole thing where they think the bull's the dangerous thing, but then the sheep fly in and rip it apart, and it's like, oh no, the sheep are now dangerous. So all of this is fun. This is some of our ridiculous boys style, like violence and gore, and we get to enjoy some of that. There's a lot of back and forth this episode with should we trust Butcher or not, particularly from Annie. Starlight's very much why we can't trust him, especially when Newman reveals that he tried to make a deal with her. And Butcher does say he didn't go through with it, so that proves him on the level. But for Starlight, this is just confirmation that they can never really trust him. So the idea of, like, is he on team with the rest of them? And it comes up again because when the plan that MM has, which is like, okay, we've got one dose of this virus for the soups, he double checks how transmissible it is, because obviously he doesn't want to put Starlight and Kimiko in danger, or I guess Newman either, but I don't think he cares specifically about her. Is that, okay, no, it's only through body fluid, it's not like, you know, transmissible via the air or anything like that, so we can put it into this dead body, we can use that to as bait, and then the sheep and whatever will eat the body and they'll all die naturally from the virus. It's good from a couple of perspectives, I think, all this stuff that it goes into. One is that it gives people who didn't watch Gen V a nice example of just how the virus works, that it makes them sick and then they die, right? And even for people who did watch Gen V, this is a bit more advanced, the version of it, but it's like, here's a nice little sample of like what it does, right? So we understand. We've established this for going forward. But then the other thing that comes up is this debate of what to do with it. And both Butcher and Newman say, no, we can't waste this one sample of the virus on these animals. We should run for it. And maybe one or two of us will die, but that's just acceptable losses. And it becomes this debate of like, no, that's bullshit. And MM even gets in Butcher's face and says, look, you're not a monster. You're a bastard. You're an MFer, I believe is the exact phrase. But you've got a heart. And that sort of like comes in and like again cuts up an argument between him and Starlight, because Starlight's like, yeah, of course you want to do this, you're evil or whatever. I shouldn't say evil, but I think what was so interesting about all this is that while I'm not necessarily always in love this season with Huey's subplot, obviously there's some crazy stuff in it this episode, but we'll get to that, is that there is something interesting here about having all these debates about Butcher with Huey not being there. Like, Huey's been kept very separate from the group dynamic this season. And I think one of the offshoots of that is that in these scenes, having Huey removed forces the other characters to have strong opinions about Butcher. Because Huey was always very forgiving, and there was times, of course, when Huey did have enough with Butcher's shit, but he did ultimately come round, and he has been sticking up for him. He has been this heart for Butcher, and having these debates play out without him being there, because he's the obvious person that will be in his corner who'll try to calm people down, forcing the other characters to really step into the roles of for and against Butcher, I think is adding a lot to this, and I really like that, especially since this, you know, this whole episode is the idea that Butcher keeps being tempted by Kessler in his head, like, you're going soft, this is your last chance to get Homelander, you have to, like, you know, man up and do the things, blah blah blah. And at the end of the episode, it turns out he has made that choice to do something really dark and vicious and cold, which is that they all assume that Newman's, you know, husband, I'm just going to call him husband for lack of a better term, but you know, that Samir is dead. But the ending of the episode reveals that no, he is alive, and Butcher actually cut off his leg on his own so that when they found the leg, they would sort of chalk it up and say he's probably dead because here's a leg. And the end of the episode is him saying, you're going to help make me more virus. I want more of it. And Butcher gives this nasty smile at the end of the episode, and it's Butcher at his worst. It's Butcher at his most Butcher. So the battle for like him doing the right or wrong thing is something that's here. And it's interesting to have that when we also have Ryan being tempted and manipulated in different ways into good or bad. And when we had Butcher and Ryan together, it felt like both of them were at their most healthiest. Well, in episode 2 or 3, whatever episode that was when they felt like they were both having positive growth. And it was almost like them being each other life. Like, Ryan was as good for Butcher as Butcher was for Ryan, and they both helped each other. And now, obviously, they're separate again. It feels like they're both going down paths based on the influences around them, or in Butcher's case, in his head. So I think that's very fascinating to me. All of the stuff is interesting. Starlight's having some problems getting her powers going, although she does punch Newman in the face. Giancarlo Esposito did make me laugh a few times, particularly when he said, this man was my scientist and then he deflowered my daughter. And Newman's like, I was 20 and plenty deflowered. That line cracked me up. But he had a few little lines like that just, he was being kind of snobby and snooty, and it was entertaining. So, yeah, I mean, all of this was like, the fun of it was the crazy animals flying around and going through walls and all the other stuff. There's also a moment with Butcher where he finds the rabbit that he let free, and it's got like tentacles coming out of it. Clearly, it had been infected with Compound V, and Butcher then stomps on these things. I was kind of, I was thinking about that scene because it felt like it was really standing. It really felt like it meant something for the character. And part of me was like, oh, he's seeing what they have done and he's stomping it out. But part of me was also thinking, does this kind of maybe represent the idea that deep down, now that it's a super, he's going to kill it? Although, to be honest, the rabbit looked pretty dead. It was almost like it was a different thing living inside the rabbit. It was, yeah, I don't know. There's maybe some thought process there we could maybe think about. But regardless, like I enjoyed the interactions of all the characters in this stuff. It did feel like an episode where it didn't feel like a big bombastic episode, right? Obviously, there's some big bombastic fun things, but it definitely felt like an episode in between the bigger, like, milestone moments of the story. And this was more of we're advancing all these things in between that are important that we need to do, getting all these characters in the places they're supposed to be. Not even just so much in terms of their plot, but in terms of where they should be emotionally for what's coming next. Because we see, I think we're reminded throughout this episode, Starlight seeing the graffiti and how hated she is, and Firecracker still saying horrible things about her on her internet show. Meanwhile, other characters doing other things. Like, there's a lot of reminders throughout this episode of what they're all going through right now. with his daughter, and MM's daughter seems pretty anti-Homelander now, but to the point where she's getting into fights, and her mom's not very happy about that, and doesn't want another family member obsessed with this superhero shit to like tear things apart. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, some of the core themes of parenthood and being a good parent and all that stuff is, again, just continuously there throughout in different ways. You've got Newman and her dad. You've got Homelander and Ryan. You've got Huey and his dad. Starlight constantly brings up what her mother did to her. Maybe not as much this season, but it's been a constant thing. It's just all throughout. It's sprinkled there. So, yeah, as far as the other stuff goes, I will say that the Huey and Hugh stuff, I'm trying to think about how to put this. There's definitely parts of it I liked this episode, right? I liked that him getting Compound V, that did save his life, had bad consequences, right? This idea that because his brain's already been, affected by his stroke, because he was already on his way out, that he quickly becomes confused, and when his powers kick in, which are like a sort of phasing through objects, but he keeps stopping in the middle of people, which is killing them instantly, and he's getting covered in blood, right? I like that. I like that because it was like, okay, we can't just save people who are dying with V, because it would be too much of a get out of jail free card. This is showing us that if you do it, it's bad. Like the hit television show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, when there was a spell to bring someone back to life who died of natural causes. like it was made clear that they'll come back wrong, and ultimately we never actually see what happens to that character. I don't want to spoil it for anyone who's not seen the show, but the choice is made to not go through with it because of that, right? You have to have consequences for these things, especially a similar logic almost applies here, is that Huey's dad was dying from a natural thing, and natural causes should be ironclad in a way that, if it's a superpower related death and they're super powered people, you can play with those rules a little bit. The rule in Buffy was always that if it's a magical related death, then there's wiggle room to bring them back, because those are not like real rules in the world, so we can have fun with that and we can use that appropriately. But if someone dies of an illness or something like that, then it should stick. It should feel like we're not not making light in the sense that it's offensive to people who have died of illnesses or anything. I don't mean that, but just making light of real world things, because if those don't mean anything anymore, then all of a sudden the ground level for what should mean anything in the show kind of falls out from under it. So having these consequences be dire, where by the end of the episode Huey has to choose to kill his father by injecting him with some stuff to let him go peacefully so that he doesn't keep going and going. And obviously he compared himself to a cat that Huey wouldn't let die when he was younger, named Jar Jar, which is where the "I don't want to be Jar Jar" line comes from. And of course his father, in a moment of coherence, does agree that he should go, right? He thinks this is the right choice. So it's all very consensual. It's all like he wants this to happen, but he obviously gets confused again before he goes. What I wasn't as keen on in this is that I've not necessarily been loving the whole like plot with the mom, because it has kept Huey's host so separate. I also think that the answer to what happened at the end of the last episode, where she did give Huey's dad the compound V, but she only just kind of did it because she thought Huey wanted it, because it fell out of his pocket, rather than she specifically made a choice to do it behind his back, or even a moment of desperation where she got tempted and did it. She just kind of did it because she assumed that's what Huey was going to do. It felt like it took away some of the meaning behind the moment. That it wasn't like this strong choice she made because she knew, either understood what it was, or understood that she was having, like, I assumed it was this moment of weakness where she gave in. So despite everything she's been doing to say, let's respect his wishes and let him die, I was thinking, there'll be like a good dramatic character moment of like her giving in and trying to save him in a moment of weakness. Not something to hate her for, but just something to like understand and be sympathetic towards, that she is human. Instead, it was just kind of, it was almost too aloof. It was like, oh, it fell out of your pocket, honey, so I thought that's what you wanted. It just made it feel like a, I don't know, like an easy thing. It just didn't feel like it had any weight behind it. But I mean, the actual visuals of him vibrating around and killing people, whether it be accidentally or not, was interesting. I'm not so sure I needed him to be hunting the mum. Like once he gets confused and thinks that he's much further back in life and that she's just left him in recent years, and he goes hunting her, and Huey has to step in and make a big speech to stop him. I wasn't as in love with that part of this. Like him accidentally killing people and being confused and scared, I think that was enough for like the decision to be made that we have to just sort of put him down at the end of the episode. I think him hunting like he's a deranged killer is a bit more fantastical and a bit less necessary. It felt like it was, and I get that they're saying he's confused and that his brain's messed up, between the stroke and then getting the compound V. But at the same time, it just kind of felt like it didn't need to be this much. He could have just killed some people accidentally and being confused, like someone who is struggling. When it became more of a, I'm hunting someone to kill them, it felt like it maybe, I don't know, like I get what they're going for. They're saying, oh, like they've actively changed them by giving the compound V, and it arguably adds to the consequences of what they've done. But it may have just been a step too far for me. Not in like a, just in a sense that I don't think it was necessary. But anyway, that was that side of the plot. It did have some nice moments though. I'm not here to crap on all of it, because I do think there were some good moments, and I do like the general idea that there's consequences for using the compound V, and it isn't just this fix for everything. So that's good. Elsewhere, we've got the whole movie like presentation reveal where they're coming out and introducing their movies. A-Train's lying about his weird Will Ferrell movie, so we get to see a little bit more of that. We see, like I say, the Gen V kids, the Guardians of Godolkin, which had a very Guardians of the Galaxy looking logo to my eye. So all these things were funny. There's a lot of little things sprinkled in here. There's Ashley being dumped by the news guy because she's not really in charge anymore, so she's not enough of a dom. And her then using him as the scapegoat because A-Train asked her for help. He's like, hey, we said we'd help each other, because obviously they found each other sneaking into Homelander's place. And her resolution to this is to give them the scapegoat of the news guy. Now, this isn't, of course, just a nice thing. She looks like maniacally evil as she hears him being tortured by the supers for being the quote-unquote leak. Homelander has all the heroes, including the Gen V. I actually thought we were going to see Kate use her powers. I was getting kind of excited. I was like, oh yeah, her powers are really fun. Let's see what she does with them. Didn't really happen, though. Everyone just starts kicking him, basically. Presumably to death. But maybe not. Maybe we'll find out he's still alive somewhere next episode. But I suspect Homelander probably wanted him dead. Of course, before this, though, he makes a big speech about how they're going to save the world and it needs fixing and so on and so on. And I'm going to ask you to do horrible things. And the Gen V kids are like, yeah, we'll do anything for you, Homelander. And everyone else seems kind of on board. What else was in all this stuff that I thought was interesting? There's one big scene, or two big scenes with Homelander and Ryan that I do need to talk about, but just generally, there was the whole, like, they're doing like a black version of the girls get it done thing, because as the Deep puts it, for the first time in the Seven, they have two black heroes plus one nondescript. Although he was Black Noir is still on the poster with the other two for this whole thing. So I guess they're just counting him. I mean, we know he's black. We've seen Under the Mask. We know the original Black Noir was black, but like I guess the public don't know if he's black or not. And they started talking about like targeted product placement. So this is kind of like almost poking at the thing on Netflix where, depending on what Netflix has designated the viewer as, so let's say you're a particular age group, you're either a man or a woman or whatever, or you're, in this case, a particular race, it'll give you a different version of the thumbnails. So let's take Die Hard, for example. With Die Hard, you've got the basic, this is just the poster, that's fine. You've got ones that focus more on an explosion with Bruce Willis's face, maybe he's holding a gun, maybe whatever. But if the Netflix account belongs to someone that Netflix has decided is a middle-aged woman, it might actually give you like a different color scheme. Like maybe instead of the explosion, it'll be Bruce Willis's face. Maybe his wife will also be on the thumbnail, and there'll be like sort of like romantic colors in the background. And maybe I'm being a bit extreme here, but that's the kind of thing that Netflix does. It has like I don't know how many it has per movie, but let's say it has half a dozen different thumbnails per movie. The idea being that different demographics might find more different images more appealing, which is absurd for a few different reasons. Because one, even if you trick someone into thinking that a movie's a romantic comedy when it's actually an action movie, it's just going to piss them off. Secondly, at least to me, like, I like the variety of the art representing what the movie is. So if I see an action movie, I want it to look like an action movie. If I see a drama, it should be more subdued. If it's a science fiction film, it should look more fantastical, or you know, like the varieties, the appeal, and like, you know, poster art's a big deal. This is just a rant I'm going on now, but like I'm saying, this bastardizes the art of actually marketing the movie and like picking your logos and poster design and like what is the look and the feel of how everyone thinks when they think of this movie. A lot of thought goes into that, and then Netflix are like, nah, lol, we're just going to have AI generated things that just kind of rearranges some basics to appeal to specific demographics, rather than trying to sell the movie for what it is in an honest way. No, this horror movie might actually be a family-friendly comedy. I mean, I don't know if they'll ever sell a horror movie as a family-friendly comedy, but you know, like, anyway, that's what this reminded me of. It's this idea that items in the movie would change to appeal to the audience. And I didn't get this particular comparison because, one, I don't drink alcohol, and I certainly don't know what different groups of people are drinking in the US. But there was like the bottle of booze would change depending on if a white audience was watching it or a black audience was watching it. The question then remains, yeah, but what are you showing in the theater? Especially when the audience is all mixed, right? There's people of all different races and creeds. Well, what are you showing then? The many questions. Anyway, not that like I'm not critiquing anything here. This is poking fun at something that I actually think is bad. So I appreciate that it's poking at it. It gets my mind going. All right, it gets me thinking about it. Bunch of stupid stuff. Anyway, so yeah, the Ryan and Homelander stuff is the more important thing here. Because Homelander's quite quiet early on. Sage is trying to talk to him, not getting much of a reaction. Sage's other big scene, and it's not even a big scene, but she tries to talk to Firecracker at one point, and Firecracker's like, you use me to get to for Star. You knew Starlight was going to do that to me, and you manipulated me. And she says she'll stab her in the back the first chance she gets. That's basically it. Homelander, in a weird way, almost has kind of learned a lesson from last episode, where he's realized that he didn't like being controlled and manipulated growing up. So when the director character's in pitching this new superhero school TV show to Ryan, saying, hey, we're going to shoot in a month and we're going to do that, and Ryan's sitting there just nodding along like he did when he was showing his outfit and everything else, and Homelander chimes in and says, what do you want? Be honest, what do you want? And he encourages Ryan to be honest about the fact that he doesn't really want to do this. Although then he says, well, maybe if there's more incentives, and he makes the director hand over his car keys and stuff. And then Ryan still just smiles and says no. And it leads to a scene where Homelander is with him and he's saying, hey, I've been manipulated my whole life and controlled. And then he starts comparing it to slavery, but worse. Like, that's the line he says. It's like slavery, but worse. And that's the moment where he's still Homelander. He's still Homelander. Like, even if there was something that was kind of like the correct lesson that he learned, there's still all these extra layers and weird think process that he's got that doesn't quite work. But the part that is working, the part that makes some sense, is that he's realizing the way to reach out to Ryan is to not control him and not to force the idea that doing stuff is fun. Instead, this idea, especially when he asks Ryan what he wants to do big picture, and Ryan says, I want to help people, not in a fake way with stunts, I want to actually help people. Homelander, and this is actually almost worse than just trying to make Ryan enjoy it, right? But before, when he was like, hey Ryan, these people are ants, they're here for our enjoyment, do what you want with them, that was obviously terrible. This is almost worse and actually more manipulative, because now it's more about doing it slyly, because he effectively takes Ryan and says, hey, why don't we help this woman? So this was set up in the earlier scene with the director, where his like PA, who's got the headset on, the director was just casually being inappropriate and saying, hey, we're going to go out later, give me your number. He makes all these little things. He's clearly abusing his power dynamic in this relationship. And Homelander looks over, he sees the director and this assistant, and he says, hey, why don't we help her? And he says, hey, send over the pretty lady, and also you come over here too. And Ryan turns, and this starts off fine, where he says, hey, was he making you uncomfortable? And she's a little bit hesitant, and Ryan assures her, you won't get in trouble, just, was he making you uncomfortable? And she's like, yeah, he kind of is. So Ryan turns to the director and says, I think she's owed an apology. And the director just kind of very quickly says, oh, I'm sorry if I made you uncomfortable, or if I overstepped or whatever. I can't remember the exact line. And Ryan's like, or I think maybe Homelander's the one that says it, but Ryan clearly thinks this as well, that it didn't sound convincing. It didn't sound real. So they make him say a more thoughtful apology. And then Homelander whispers in Ryan's ear, and this makes him smile. He's like, hey, I think you should get down on your knees and tell her you're sorry. Which he does, and he gives a more in-depth apology. This is starting to get to like a weird place where, while Ryan's goal was understandable and nice and was trying to solve a problem that needed solving, it's veering into weird territory with this part of it. But then where it gets especially absurd to me is Homelander suggests something to Ryan, which he also likes, and he says to the woman, he says, "Hey, I want you to slap him." And she does. And she does it so quickly that I'm thinking that she might even enjoy the slap. And then he says, "Do it again, do it again." She slaps him multiple times. And it makes Ryan smile, it makes Homelander smile. And by the end of the scene, what started off feeling kind of healthy has turned really unhealthy. And what I mean by that is that, one, obviously advocating violence as the solution and like teaching the lesson is very unhealthy in and of itself. But I think the thing that really got to me was the idea that Ryan wanted to step in and help because he could tell this woman was being casually harassed by her boss. And he wanted to do something about that because he could recognize that was wrong. Good. A+. The problem is that by the end of the scene, she's kind of just being forced to do something for someone else who's got power over her. Because, what if she says no? Homelander's just going to give her a scary look, and she'll feel forced into doing this now. Yeah, it might not be unwanted romantic advances the way the director was doing it, but it's still a power dynamic that's been abused. She's still in a position where she's been forced to do something. There's a whole like turn here, and that's what I mean by this being almost worse and more malicious than trying to just tell Ryan that abusing people's fun and that he can do what he wants. Ryan has been taught a lot of right from wrong from his mum. He has a good sense of that. So what's happening now is that Homelander, whether he's doing this consciously or stumbled into it based on this new like technique he's using, he's effectively manipulating Ryan into doing things like this, which are clearly over a line where it's unhealthy and it's abusing power, but he's convincing him to do it under the guise that he's doing it for a good reason and that he can feel good about it, which might actually make it more problematic to deconstruct this later. Like, let's say later on someone has to try and convince Ryan of what's happening. This is actually much harder to have him recognize what's going on, because it is under these layers of you're doing this for a good reason, you're being a hero, you're helping this person, but instead you're holding your power over this person, even though that's the person you're supposed to be helping. And then the entire act itself is also just very much draconian and abusive in and of itself. So that's in many ways, this was probably the most layered scene of the episode for me, is because it was taking what was one simple, you will wield your power over these peasants and you will enjoy it, has turned into, you can help them, this is you doing good. Like, this is almost more brainwashy than anything else that Homelander's done. So it's very interesting. And arguably, you could almost say that in a weird way, maybe he's learned that basically he's taking on what was said to him about how Homelander was manipulated into wanting approval. And that was the most effective way to keep Homelander in line. He's effectively employing a version of that on Ryan, right? He's giving Ryan this sense of accomplishment and approval, and this idea that he can do good. He's making that flourish, but under his parameters, under what he considers to be a good way of doing it, and instilling these early bad habits and thinking process into Ryan. So I think that stuff's really good. It's probably my favorite thing in the episode, I would say. Not that I didn't enjoy a lot of the other things going on, but that was for me what stood out, which is interesting because obviously it's a very relatively small part screen time wise of the episode. There's way more stuff in the farm and spread out over all the various different scenes of the movie stuff. Like, that takes up a bit of screen time as well. I mean, it was a good episode though. Like, it advances everything. Obviously, Butcher going dark at the end and having this guy captive ruthlessly so he can maybe get this virus to take on. And I do wonder then, like, is it going to be Ryan that stops Butcher? Is Ryan going to be the one that, if not, I don't even necessarily mean physically, I mean, maybe he will, but is Ryan potentially in the path of, like, destruction going to be what makes Butcher slow down? Is Huey being back with the team perhaps more regularly from either next episode or soon after onwards going to again be this influence. It's interesting stuff. I suppose the one thing I've not really talked about actually is Frenchie. At the end of the episode, he goes to the police station to turn himself in for murder. Uh, I kind of like this moment because it at least felt like a step forward as opposed to Frenchie just feeling guilty all the time. This at least felt like he was making a solid decision to actually try and finally give himself the punishment that he feels he deserves, right? He's finally actually making a move on it as opposed to just moping around and being sad about how guilty he is about everything he's ever done. I don't know where this is going to go precisely. Are the others just going to like get him out immediately because I mean they can get a presidential pardon apparently, so why not? Or are we going to go through some motions here where he's in here? And obviously one of the big themes that maybe we can sort of come back round to in this season is that of forgiveness. Will his boyfriend forgive him? It's maybe a tough ask given the horrific thing that he did, but Huey seems to be kind of forgiving his mother. Obviously, we have this idea that Homelander, under no, like, even though he said he forgave them, there's no way Homelander was actually forgiving the people who tortured him as a child, right? I think we're having a lot of characters being challenged with the idea of, like, can they forgive and move on? Even Huey and A-Train, right? That's obviously maybe the most healthy example so far this season, maybe? A lot of characters juggling a lot of potential guilt here, okay, and a lot of mummy and daddy issues. It's rife throughout the show. Oh, and just before I go, I do have to mention that the man with the whole problem from Gen V, Ted Knight, was back in this episode. He was presenting his new movie, and I didn't catch any little jokes about him staring at any random holes, but I was looking for it, and I'm almost a little disappointed there wasn't just one moment where he looked over and saw something, right? If you have no idea what I'm talking about, there was an episode of Gen V where this character was revealed to have a crippling perversion for any hole-shaped object where he would have to have sex with it. And that included donuts, it included the top of a traffic cone, it included a random hole in a tree. If he saw a hole, he had to put it in. And it was a very funny couple of scenes in Gen V when this came up. So I was looking for a possible moment here at some point, but we didn't get one. Oh well. But I feel like my thoughts on this one were a bit more scattered for whatever reason. But as per usual, there was a lot going on with all the characters, and it did have some sort of tight themes sort of going throughout. You know, especially just something as simple as we have Newman talking about how she was raised and how she wants to raise her daughter at the same time that Homelander is trying his new methods with Ryan, right? You know, there's obviously conflict between Newman and Esposito, and that's kind of, you know, a different example of how someone raised a soup, right? Because he raised a soup, and he kept her a secret. He told her to keep it a secret, and that's got consequences on how she sees life. Whereas Homelander, of course, on the flip side of things, is now, well, he was raised by humans to begin with, but like now he's raising his own soup, and he's, you know, it's not an accident that we had a scene a couple of episodes ago. In fact, it was the pilot, or not the pilot, sorry, the premiere of the season. It was episode 1, where we got both Ryan and Newman's daughter in the same scene together. I don't think that was an accident. I think that the show wanted us to sort of think about and compare those two different characters and how they're being treated or raised, and how they're being either coddled or controlled or whatever. You know, Newman went out of her way to give her powers, right? Now, she did it because she thought she needed powers to be safe, to be able to protect herself. But it is interesting to think about how she's empowering that, whereas Homelander, well, he didn't go out of his way to give Ryan powers, is trying to instill how Ryan uses them in a big way. So there's a lot to think about. Anyway, that's the episode. Thank you very much for joining me. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Also, go to Patreon. I forgot to plug the Patreon there. It's kind of important. It's the reason why I'm able to do this as consistently as I am. So go to patreon.com/MailFuzzTV. Like, subscribe, all the other usual things. They all help. Every single bit of it. Thank you very much. I'll see you next time. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?